So today we're going to talk about Kiwisaver for contractors, freelancers, for the self-employed. Something close to my heart, something close to yours as well. So where do you want to start, Rupert?
Well, I think there's kind of a lot to talk about. The reason why I was so keen to do this is we've recently started opening up to getting people to call us up and ask us questions. And what truly shocked us and why I reached out to you, James, is I think about 50% of the people that have been calling us up have actually been contractors, trying to figure out how they get into Kiwisaver, why they should do Kiwisaver as a contractor. And so I thought, well, it just really astonished me that so many people were asking these questions. And so we've got a whole lot that I'd like to cover. But before that, just out of my own personal curiosity, James, when you were a contractor, before you started up Hnry, did you bother with Kiwisaver, or was it in the too hard basket, or what did you do?
Too hard basket. Yeah. So probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I became a contractor, and it just, whilst I had Kiwisaver previously with employers, and I'd maybe taken a bit of an active interest in it then, as soon as I was a contractor, the idea of maybe setting up a regular payment or planning for that, it felt like it was something that was going to be too difficult. And maybe the incentive wasn't there because I wasn't getting employer contributions. But yeah, I'm sad to say that I only started paying into my Kiwisaver once we'd started Hnry, and I became a salaried employee of my own company.
But that's still awesome. And that's, I think that's still a great thing, because there's still a lot of I'd still class you as self-employed. And there's a lot of people that are self-employed and go, no, I don't need to. Because I think from what we see, one of the things is a lot of people will go, no, I don't really need to worry about my retirement. I'll deal with it later. That's kind of not something that we think through. And that's a real shame, because what we do know is the earlier you start saving for your retirement, the easier it is to hit your objectives. And retirement poverty is a real issue here in New Zealand. And the only way that we can solve that is getting people to start saving early and start contributing early. The other thing why I say well done for contributing is because what we see from a lot of people is they go, I'll deal with it later. I'll deal with it later. They're all expecting a holy grail. You've ticked one of the Kiwi's favorite holy grail. I'm going to have a successful tech startup, and that's going to sort out the whole problems. That's this generation's holy grail, and kind of a lot of people think that's where they're going to go. And it's like our parents or the generation 10, 15 years ahead of us all thought, oh, I'll just do a property development and that'll sort out my retirement. And the honest truth is that 9.5 out of 10 of those schemes mean you lose your retirement pot rather than triple your retirement pot. And so well done, because Kiwisaver is a great way to make sure you get started on that journey.
And I think what's really interesting is when, it is so easy when you are an employee. It is literally like ticking a box. And I know when we started Hnry, there's taking care of tax and financial admin, but the financial planning piece was always a thing that I remember when I was a contractor, it was always the hardest thing. You don't, when you're dealing with stuff yourself, you don't know how much money in your pocket is actually yours. And so as soon as we started Hnry to kind of take away that financial burden, what we wanted to do is say, well, how do we put financial planning at the center of this so people can contribute to their Kiwisaver as a proportion of their income, and it's as simple as like a set and forget. And I think that's when you're an employee, genuinely Kiwisaver becomes set and forget. But when you're a contractor, if you're not using something like Hnry, it tends to be a real active choice that you have to make, and something you have to remember, and something you have to be quite involved in, rather than actually building those good financial habits about just regularly paying in.
Yeah, and that's got some good and bad stuff, right? I think the one slight issue with the set and forget approach, which is where most people go for when they're employed, is they don't make the decisions they need to make. So you sit there, you're going to contribute 3%, which is you tick the box, that's what you do. That's only going to give you about half of what you actually need for your retirement. You got 25% of people that have never made the right decision around, or never even made a decision full stop around being in a Kiwisaver fund. And so on one hand, the set and forget in my view, drives some pretty terrible outcomes. because there are important
So
decisions.
I always hold myself up as being the poster child for like bad financial management decisions as a contractor. I hadn't considered Kiwisaver as being one of those, but now, like, even as an employee, I'm like, okay, I can hold myself up as a poster child for like advocating like set and forget for Kiwisaver.
Yeah, no, but that's the truth, right? But so actually, what's really interesting is because as a contractor, you are making an active decision, and so I hate to say this, you are already kind of probably better than 75-80% of the population. And so I think from my perspective and what we've seen from the feedback from our clients is when contractors and independent employees or non-salaried employees, I think is what we're calling them, when non-salaried employees engage with their Kiwisaver, they do it in a really good way because they've actually had to think through it, and it's been a lot harder than just simply ticking the box. But I think the first conversation that we always have is, well, why do it? Because I don't get the employer contributions, and do it. And it's just getting people to cross that bridge and figuring out an easy way to do it.
Well, I think, we always talk about people kind of setting good financial habits, and I think one of the things that we observe with people using our service is that those people who maybe are actively managing their Kiwisaver contributions are doing so in a way that is kind of based around the way that they earn. So we all know with contracting, it's not your income is not sort of guaranteed for months and months on end. But when things are doing very well, we're seeing people actually increase their level of contribution to Kiwisaver and say, well, actually, I can, because I've just picked up a big contract for 6 months, I can afford to put more away. And maybe they're managing that actively with their Kiwisaver provider and taking a bit more of a kind of proactive approach in terms of what they do with their Kiwisaver and how aware they are. Because, again, sort of what I've done in the past is literally the set and forget, which I now realize I shouldn't do. So thank you. You've called me out on that.
No.
But I mean, how, and we were going to talk about, some of the mistakes that the independent earners can make when it comes to Kiwisaver, but I'm guessing that's one of them is not actually being aware of where that money is going and what's happening with it and the impact on it.
I mean, and that's a huge issue, right? So we think that probably about 20% of people don't even know where their Kiwisaver is, right? And if we sit there and we go, so that the stats around Kiwisaver are really scary. About 70-odd% of people think that Kiwisaver is going to make up the majority of their retirement income. About another 60% of people don't actually have any savings sitting outside of Kiwisaver. Yet we know that people just don't bother engaging with it. So it is actually a really, really hard piece. So what we were and that's one of the things that we've been built. We're a digital advisor that's helping people make better financial decisions around their Kiwisaver, and it's all about how do we get them to engage. And as a contractor, I think that's actually the advantage, because as you say, you need to think harder about your money, and fundamentally as a contractor, you're taking more risk. Every month it's slightly different. You need to make sure you're going to get the next contract. You need to make sure you're going to get the next thing, which is why when you do engage, it's great. But what we do know about Kiwisaver, we know about all savings full stop, is unless it's coming directly from source, i.e. it kind of comes out of your pay slip almost before you see it, it's really hard, because the last thing that people do is they kind of run through their expenses. They get paid on a Thursday. They might go out on a Thursday night or on a Friday. They'll go have a couple of lunches, big weekend. They get to Monday and think, cool, okay, now I'm going to put something in my Kiwisaver. Oh, there's nothing. And so that's the beauty that's kind of one of the important things I would say from a contractor. So number one thing, if you are contributing as a contractor, figure out how you can get the money out automatically and get it there as easy as possible. Because if you are just sitting there going, I'm just going to put in what's left over at the end of the month or at the end of the week, there's actually not going to be much left over. It needs to be done purposefully. The other big one that we see a little bit for contractors is because they're unaware, they might have put $20 in here or $50 in here or $10 this week. They're unaware of how much they've actually contributed. And so one of the big benefits of Kiwisaver is that there's government money on offer. So if you contribute $1,042, then you're going to get $540 every year from the government. And that process is just finished. And what we found, we got quite a few phone calls from contractors going, well, I don't actually know how much I put in. How do I find that out? Where do I go and get that information? So it's actually been quite hard for them to keep track of where it is. And so I think from a contractor perspective, those would be the two things that probably differ a little bit from an everyday employer. But in terms of everyday employed people, the two biggest things that we tell people is, number one, understand what your contributions are going to give you, right? We call it, it's a little bit of a Kiwisaver time bomb, is how we describe it, because everyone's ticked the box. Everyone thinks that they're contributing 3% because that's what the government's told them to do, but that is not going to give them the retirement they expect, which is fine as long as they are aware of that. And I fear that it's people like your or my friends, James, our generation, that are going to get to 65 and go, what? I've been contributing all my life. They told me I was fine, and now I'm not. So make sure you understand what you're going to get, and then being in the right fund. The difference between being in the right fund and the wrong fund is going to save you hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time you retire. And that's as simple as, you could sit in the wrong fund and contribute 6% your whole life, or you can sit in the right fund and contribute 3%, and you're going to end up in the same answer.
It's really fascinating, because I think so often, and we talk to a lot of financial advisors when we set up Hnry. One of the big things that we always got told by financial advisors was that contractors, freelancers, independent earners find it really difficult to make financial plans for the long term, because they say, well, I don't know what my money's going to be. I don't even know how much of what is in my pocket is mine and what's for tax. So a lot of the time at Hnry, we say to people, look, well, now you do know how much of yours is in your pocket, is yours to keep, etc. Suddenly you can start making those financial plans. But I think it's about people, there is taking a step, like contributing to Kiwisaver and just having the knowledge you've done that. And then there's actually going to the extent of saying, I know how much I need when I'm retired. Like, I know how much I need to live on, because, going and doing that exercise to say, let's assume retirement at whatever age, let's look at how long I'm probably going to live, how much do I need to live on? Like, that's the time bomb that you're talking about there, is actually people not even doing the quick maths to say, like, this is what I'll be left up with. Because it's very easy with Kiwisaver providers to say, okay, well, this is where you'll end up. And you look at that number and you go, wow, that's a bigger number than I have today. Therefore, that must be a good thing. But once you actually break down, and you look at maybe our parents' generation, you break down how much they have to live on based on their retirement savings. All of your choices should be based on what kind of retirement that you want to have. And I don't think that's maybe the thing that's top of mind for people when they set and forget their Kiwisaver.
This is my favorite conversation, is because number one question we get, right? How much do I need to retire? And you're so right. When you tell people, oh, you need $1 million, or you need $1.5 million, or you need $500,000, those numbers are completely meaningless and completely pointless. You sit there and today you earn $80,000 a year pre-tax. That means you take home $1,200 a week. Fundamentally, if you want to maintain your current lifestyle, you need to have a Kiwisaver pot that delivers you $1,200 a week. And I hate to say it, but it is as simple as that. And you can do all the budgeting and all the thinking that you want, but if you want to maintain your lifestyle, which, let's be honest, you've got to 65 with a certain quality of life, you don't want to change it. And so, yeah, that's it's a great point, and one that we don't talk about enough. We focus on big numbers because we like talking about $1 million. We like talking about 600 grand. We don't like talking about $1,200 a week.
Yeah. And it's so true. And we often talk with the independent earners about planning for downtimes in earning. So, particularly certain industries over the December-January period, they may not be working as much. And, we talk to the guys at sorted.co.nz about what they recommend to people. And often we talk about having 2 months committed expenses put away for, times of lower earning, and essentially maintaining that 2 months committed expenses. That almost seems like a more achievable goal for people than talking about, like, actually, if that's 2 months committed expenses, what is it? How much do I actually live on per week? And therefore, when it comes to retirement, what's my expectation? Because it kind of needs to be put in more real terms for people about how much should I be putting away each week in order to try and get to that stage. And we found with a lot of our customers, with our kind of allocations feature where people can pay into Kiwisaver, the thing that people really get excited about is actually seeing those contribution metrics over time and kind of saying, I'm going to allocate 6% of my income to my Kiwisaver, and then I can track over time how much I'm contributing, because once you understand that direct correlation between how much you're putting away and how much you will get per week in retirement, it just makes it far more real for people.
Oh, massively, right? And so we do quite a lot of corporate presentations, and the chart that we give people is coming back to my $80,000 salary person. That person will be putting it's about $35 a week away into their Kiwisaver. By the time we add in government contributions, unfortunately, contractors, it's not so much employee, but that world turns into $305 a week. So your $30 a week today turns into $300 a week by the time you get to retirement. And even because the majority of that gain is coming from the investment gains, which is the benefits of the compounding interest, which is why you need to start early. But even as a contractor where you're not getting the employer contributions, it's still the same set of maths, right? You're 30, you might be putting in $50 a week rather than 30, but that is still going to turn it into $300 a week. And that's the important piece to get people to recognize. Start early and you will see how important it gives you.
And it's really interesting, right? Because I think a lot of people, again, particularly in that contractor space, have traditionally found just basic budgeting, monthly budgeting, quite tough. And I think now being in the situation of people who've kind of got rid of that whole kind of financial admin tax headache, and they go, okay, actually now rather than spend my time making tax payments or filing and doing all of that kind of admin, I'm going to spend my time doing my family budget, and I'm going to look at what we're spending week on week, because I think it's really easy to say to people, hey, look, that's going to result in $300 per week when you're retired. But I wonder how many people, if you said to them, do you think that's more or less than you have now? Or, what do you think that's going to get you? I just genuinely think, from my perspective, I think you're so in the thick of it at what you're doing day to day. It's very easy to forget the fact that you probably need a significant amount more than that when you factor in all of your committed expenses for a significant number of years where you won't be earning, which is why we see a lot of people coming out of retirement and saying, how can I supplement some of the kind of pension payments that I'm getting? What is the kind of allowable amount that I can earn to give me that extra money? And I think all of us would want to get to the stage of when you are retired, that's it, you are retired, rather than actually I've got to come back out of retirement, come back into the workforce because of the fact that I wasn't able to put enough away when I was working.
Yeah. Have you ever read a book? Have you heard of The Barefoot Investor?
I have, yeah. I haven't read the book, but it's one of those things where it's on my to-do list of things that gets longer and longer.
No, because what you're saying is exactly what he talks about, where he says the most important thing you can do for your future and for your financial kind of well-being is take the time to sit down and talk about it. So his big piece of advice is once a quarter, if you've got a partner, the two of you should go out on a date night, go out to a nice restaurant, have dinner, spend the first 20 minutes talking about all this stuff. Talk about your budget, talk about your saving plan, talk about what you want to have in retirement, talk about where you are versus your goals, because that's the issue. No one actually spends time talking about it. And then the beauty about what you guys have done is if I sit there, I'd contracted for a little bit, when I sat there and contracted, I'd spend hours trying to figure all my tax and all that stuff out. But actually, why don't you just reinvest 2 hours a quarter of that time to having those conversations, and it will make you so much better off in the long run.
Yeah. I'm sure that myself and my wife would love to sit down and have that conversation, because genuinely, we started this business together 3 years ago. I would say probably 90% of our conversations are dominated by what are we doing in this business and how are we growing, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think we've talked about our family finances for quite a while. And, it used to be something that, we found difficult to talk about when we were contracting, because we were both contracting at the time and we were so bogged down by the kind of tax and admin thing that, if I'm honest, and probably confession time here, I don't think we've sat down and talked about it for about 5 or 6 years. And it's interesting because we always talk about, kind of long-term goals, but we very seldom talk about the practical steps from here to there. And, again, confession time for me. I'm kind of, I'm just in the same position as I think a lot of other people, that sometimes it's easy to get bogged down in the day to day of what you're doing and not actually start making those proper forward plans. And we have, so many kind of contractors and freelancers come to us and just kind of go, well, where do I get started? Like, a lot of people might not even have a Kiwisaver provider, and like, that's half of the battle, is kind of going, well, where do I go? What do I choose? Like, part of the problem is that there's not good resources out there where people can actually get a really, really clear idea. So they end up going with a default provider, or just getting what they're given. And I've never been that impressed with the default providers that get put in front of you. Like, I mean, what's your take on that? Like, default provider wise, how many people do you see that just literally take whatever is that option right in front of them, rather than doing some actual research?
Oh, most people. Most people will be with a default provider or bank. We know they've got about 80-85% market. Well, the default providers have got about 85-90% market share. And there's a few, it's either they've gone in as a default customer, or it's their bank that's turned around to them and said, hey, I'll give you a 10 basis point margin, a 10 basis point discount on your mortgage if you're willing to give us your Kiwisaver as well. And no one thinks about their Kiwisaver, and so they never actually think about the cost of that decision on the way through. But what's really scary about that is, you're dead right to say haven't been impressed by the default offerings. We did a piece of work a couple of weeks ago, and we showed that across every single category of fund, if you were a default provider, you'd underperformed the non-default providers by a couple of percent. By about 1%. And the reasoning for that or our view on the reasoning was that the banks, the default providers are largely the big banks, and they're just not specialist wealth managers. Their core business is lending money and taking deposits. Their core business is not managing people's Kiwisavers. And we think that's kind of one of the core reasons why they haven't done very well at it. And it's a real shame, because Kiwis are missing out on a huge amount because they're just taking the easy option.
Oh, it's super illuminating. I mean, I think, for me, one of the things that was always tough being a contractor is actually kind of being able to distill that wealth of information down into kind of manageable chunks. For someone like me, that I would say is like super time poor, like, it's very, very difficult. And I'm going to put you on the spot here and say, just before we finish, if you could give one piece of advice to independent earners when it comes to Kiwisaver, what is the one thing that you think they should be doing? One thing that they can maybe start with?
Set a plan. Figure out how much you need, what your objective is. Is it a first home? Is it a retirement? And figure out what you need to get to, what you need to save to get there. Every single provider now should have the tools. I mean, Koura, we personally believe we've got the best tools, but that's me talking my own trumpet. At the end of the day, use the tools that are there to make sure you can set yourself a real plan, understand how much you need to put in every week, and then stay disciplined to try and make it. You might have variable income, but that doesn't mean that you can't put it in on a quarterly basis. If your income mixes on a week-by-week basis or a month-by-month, think, okay, at the end of the quarter, let's do a bit of a reconciliation. I needed to put in $2,000 in this quarter. Have I done that? Have I not done that? But unless you're willing to stay disciplined about how much you're putting in, and you understand what that plan will give you, you're very unlikely to hit your objective. And you're only going to figure that out when you turn 65. And I hate to say it, but it's too late by then.
That's awesome. Super, great context for me as someone who probably needs to spend more time thinking about my Kiwisaver. But
your confession is no different to me. I mean, I started this off saying, don't hope for the Holy Grail and don't expect for something to happen in the future. But me and my wife, we don't talk about it. We both contribute to Kiwisaver, and we hope that that's going to be enough. But as I say, let's do what I say, not do what I do.
Yeah, well, hopefully people watching this get some really good tips on how to go forward. And again, it's always about taking those little steps and getting those solid habits in place.